If you're watching this video, you would have already hopefully seen the video expand or contract how to, which explains how this strategy works, this strategy for bringing other voices into your text and taking a stance on them when you do. So let's just review quickly how the strategy works. You ask yourself these questions. What's my purpose? Who's my audience? What other voices should be brought into my text to achieve my purpose with this audience? Does it serve my purpose to expand or contract the idea space around each voice with this audience? And therefore, once I've made those decisions, what phrase will I use to introduce each of these voices? Let's have a look at this as a model. The overall purpose of this piece of text is to argue that people should buy organically produced food. The audience is high school students who belong to an environmental committee on their school campus. So let's review the structure of an argument. It starts with a thesis, the arguments in support of that thesis, 1, 2, 3, maybe more, and then we reinforce that thesis. Each of those arguments makes a point in support of the main thesis, has some evidence to support that point, explains how that evidence supports that point. There'll be a summary of the paragraph, and perhaps there'll be a counter argument which acknowledges that there might be a weakness somewhere in that point. And if there's a counter argument, it will have a turn against, which turns against the point that's being made, and then turns back to reinforce that point, showing that the evidence in the turn against is not as strong as what the author is using to support their argument. So back to our argument, to argue that people should buy organically produced food to this group of high school students in the environmental committee. One of the arguments that we might use as a subpoint in this argument is that organic farming preserves the soil. We might introduce our evidence by saying studies by ... clearly demonstrate that organic farming methods increase soil organic carbon over time, which ... preserves the soil. So in this example, we're contracting the idea space. We're saying it clearly demonstrates this. This is our main argument. So we want to put the evidence fairly strongly and suggest that there's not a lot of other relevant claims out there that might go against this. Because we've got a fairly smart audience and because they want to understand everything about this issue, we might put a counter argument in there. So we might have a turn against. And the turn against might be something like proponents of conventional farming claim that organic farming requires more land and so destroys more habitat. As our evidence for that, we might have a particular study that reports that, and then we'll give some land use comparison statistics. Why have we used that language here? We've said that proponents of conventional farming claim that, and we've expanded the idea space around this particular claim. Because we want to leave this perspective open. We're about to go back in a turn back, the other part of our counter argument, to argue against it. So we want to leave it open to alternatives. And then in reporting the particular evidence to support that, we've taken a neutral stance, reports that the evidence we're using is actually true, and we're acknowledging that, and we leave it at that. In our turn back, we might claim that the idea that organic farming requires more land ignores the fact that conventional farming, because of soil depletion, over time requires even more land because land has to be abandoned and new land farmed. And also the idea that conventional farming destroys habitats by pesticide and fertilizer runoff. So our evidence for that might be numerous studies convincingly demonstrate that. And in this case, once again, we're contracting the idea space. We're trying to very convincingly say that our evidence in our turn back is weightier than the evidence we gave for the turn against our main argument. And so we're going to use the idea of contracting here. So this is a fairly simple example. The decisions around these are quite complex, and it may not actually always work out that you're going to use in an argument to contract around your main argument, but it gives you an idea of what the choices are. Remember the phrase bank that we looked at, that gives you all the different language you can use to introduce these things. And if you'd like to consider then when you're thinking about bringing in other voices, when you might choose to summarize, when you might choose to paraphrase, and when you might choose to quote an outside voice, you can go to the strategy, summarize, paraphrase,